Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Archery Project. I'm your host, Zach Plasica, and today we are talking about overlooked accuracy killers and how to fix them, right? These are things we see with new shooters who have come through our shop, and these are things that I have personally struggled with on my own over time. And typically I see this personally with me is whenever I've put my bow down for a little bit and the season's over, I've taken a little bit of time away from shooting my bow, and you'll notice very quickly form and technique deteriorate when it comes to shooting a bow. And that's why I'm so big on staying behind a bow all year round to continue to fine tune and hone those skills so that they don't, diminish or you don't lose them, because I'm a firm believer if you don't use them, you do lose them when it comes to accuracy or archery, and you have to rebuild them. And it does take a little bit of time. So when you're consistent with your bow and shoot your bow all year, it doesn't have to be a lot, but you just continue to reinforce those good skills, fundamentals in order to continue to stay accurate, right? Accuracy with archery is all about repeatability. You have to do the same thing the same way every time in order to be accurate. So talking about this, we're not talking about products, updating equipment, new sights, anything like that. We're assuming the bow and everything is set up correctly, right? The bow has been set up for you, right? This is more so about the holes within your shot process that we see are pretty common and issues, again, that I have struggled with. And these don't necessarily show up on paper, right? When you look at the bow's been set up correctly for you, but you go to shoot the bow and you just have a consistency problem, right? That's the issue, right? Somewhere within the process, it's not a repeatable process and you're falling, your shot process is missing something. There's a hole in it. There's a gap that needs to be closed up and fixed. So getting right into it, the number one thing that I think that we see, the problem that is most evident with people is the grip issue. I mean, I would say that is true for most, especially your new shooters. And I think that it comes along with maybe a little bit of fear. But what we see is there's a lot of death gripping of the riser, right? You just squeeze that riser really, really hard. That's not what we want when it comes to archery, right? We want a repeatable grip, right? And we want consistency, and we want I don't want to say relaxed, but the fingers need to be relaxed within the grip. I notice it with myself a lot. Whenever I put down my bow and then I go back out and I pick it up after a little bit of time, I'll notice I'll have left and right misses. And as much as I want to think it's the bow, after redeveloping my form and technique a little bit, the bow's back shooting as it could. And it came down to me and the way I grip my bow, right? And the way I like to do this that has worked for me and eliminated a lot of these issues is the lifeline in your hand that runs right through here. The grip sets nice and flush up against that meaty part of your thumb, and it's a consistent pressure on the actual grip itself. And the fingers up front are nice and relaxed, right? Almost when you look at it, like your hand's at like a 45-degree angle, and those fingers are nice and relaxed. I do put a little bit, I like the tips of my fingers touching the front of the riser just a little bit, but everything is relaxed. You can still move the fingers around at full draw. And that prevents me from taking and squeezing that riser, because what happens as soon as you squeeze that riser is it induces torque one way or the other, right? When you look at the riser, you look up at the cam, it's not perfectly straight. There's a little bit of torque left or right, and that causes inconsistencies and poor arrow flight, right? The arrow's got to correct when it comes out of the bow. You'll notice a great way to see if you're torquing a bow is there's a couple ways you can approach it. For me, I like to look up at my cam and my string and make sure it's tracking in line, right? So everything's in line. The string is not one way or the other where it's got to correct whenever you release the arrow. It's perfectly in line. Another way to look at it is if you run like a vertical pin, you start to see those pins start to rotate one way or the other, that's another great way to tell. But another thing is you can do is when you shoot it through paper, right? If you've got it to where it's been shooting perfect bullet holes through paper, assume everything's set up correctly. If you go and play with your grip a little bit, Death grip the riser and shoot it through paper and see what it does. It'll tell you, it'll give you a hard left or right tear, which is obviously a problem, right? If it's amplified in paper there, you know that it takes time for it to correct. It can cause those arrow flights downrange, which cause you to miss left or right. So that's one of the biggest things that we see first from people. And it can be hard to fix sometimes. And I think a lot of it for our new shooters, like I said, it comes down to almost like a fear of that bow slipping out of their hand maybe. But the other thing that happens whenever you death grip that riser, induce any torque, is you put the belly of your forearm in the path of your string and you will hit your forearm. So a grip, I think, is one of the biggest things people need to work on and be conscious of. It's all about repeatability. So that's why I think it's important that whenever you're shooting arrows, you're shooting your bow, that you have your shot process laid out and you work through it slow, right? We're not in a rush to shoot arrows. We see a lot of people shoot arrow after arrow after arrow, and they're not methodical with their thought process. So what happens is they start to build these bad habits, and they reinforce these bad habits by shooting that way. And it just causes a host of problems down the line, right? Inconsistencies with your shot, especially when you start to shoot out to those greater distances. Inconsistencies or errors within your shot process are amplified the further you shoot that bow. So you need to be conscious of that and be leery of a poor grip and the way you grip that bow. And that's why I think it's important too, whenever it comes to deciding on the bow that's right for you, that you test shoot the bows. And I reference it a lot. I think it's important that archery shops let you try different bows just so you can get a feel for the bow and see how that bow fits in your hand. And if you do like the grip or not, because a grip is a major deciding factor for a bow. And if you cannot grip that bow correctly, it might not, one, you may need to change the way you grip a bow, or two, maybe that's just not, that bow doesn't pair well with you. And that's why it's great to have so many different options. But grip is a major issue that we see within accuracy. And if you have an issue up close, you're definitely going to have an issue as the distance starts to increase. So it's important that you take time and develop a good grip, a repeatable grip process, so that you're not having these inconsistencies and causing these left and right issues. There's a handful of ways you can work on it. Making sure that every time you grip the bow, you can close your eyes, grab the bow, and make sure that you've got the same amount of pressure, right on that meaty part of your thumb pad. Your fingers are relaxed. And then whenever it comes to practicing, blank bailing, shooting up close, just focusing on the fundamental, the actual grip portion itself, make sure that's your focus, versus going out and trying to shoot distance, right? Because you can build a good habits by blank bailing. Grab the bow, go through your shot process, grab the bow, make sure your grip is repeatable the same way every time. You don't have a high wrist one time, low wrist the next, death grip, too far one way or the other. Develop that process, get familiar with your bow, blank bail until it's like you just can't do it wrong. So if you notice that the bow's grip is twisting in your hand, that's going to cause issues. So make sure you really put a lot of effort and thought into how you grip that bow and how you pick that bow up. And like I said, slow down whenever you shoot your arrows. Take your time and work through that process. Develop the process that works for you. There's some great resources out there. John Dudley with his his School of Knock series is fantastic. Shot IQ, Joel Turner. There's a lot of guys that really do a very good job of this, explaining it and helping you work through that process. But what we see a lot from most people, the biggest struggle is a repeatable grip. So make sure when you pick that bow up, that grip is the same way every time, because every input in that bow has an output. So if you have a bad input, you're going to have a bad output. So the goal is to minimize bad inputs so that everything, when that arrow or that release goes off and that arrow leaves the bow, it leaves as it should, right? It doesn't have to fight and correct right away because of a poor grip. So I would highly encourage you to make sure that whenever you go through, you pick your bow up, start with your grip, and make sure you grab that bow the same way every time. It's going to save you a lot of headache and a lot of heartache whenever you're shooting those distances, because like I said, any errors are amplified the further the distance. From there, the next thing that I would see is peep inconsistency, right? And this is something that I've struggled, almost like falling out of your peep sight. I have to be conscious of it, because I'll notice sometimes at full draw, whenever I'm going through and pulling my shot, my head almost comes out of the peep, and I get almost like a scope shadow, right? As you guys all know, peep alignment is critical for being accurate with the bow and being consistently accurate. That thing has to line up with the scope housing the same way every time in order for that arrow to impact where you want it to. As soon as you start to fall out of the peep sight, one way or the other, or you get that almost like scope shadow, where it's not lined up and haloed around the actual scope itself correctly or the same way every time, you get those misses. And that's something that I struggled with quite a bit, right? I would kind of almost float. So that's where proper setup with the bow is important, right? And anchor point is so critical to being accurate with your bow. And again, that's the setup process, right? We're assuming your bow has been set up correctly. So whenever you draw back, you anchor the same way every time with whatever release it is, whether it's a handheld release, it's a wrist release, doesn't matter. Your anchor point has got to be consistent. And when that bow was set up for you, that peep sight should be set correctly, right? That peep sight should be moved to your eye whenever you're getting that bow set up, not you trying to find that peep sight and move to it. It always has got to be moved to you. If you don't, if it's not set up and you're set up correctly and you're constantly trying to chase that peep height, right? You're just constantly trying to find it. You need to stop and reset that bow up correctly so that you're not chasing it. Because whenever you start to fall out of your peep sight or you're constantly searching for it, especially when you're shooting angles and stuff like that, you're going to have inconsistencies that are very, very evident, especially the more you shoot the bow and the further you shoot your bow. Being anchored correctly and peep alignment is critical for accuracy when it comes to shooting your bow. So as a new shooter, right, or if you're somebody that's getting a new bow set up, you need to make sure that you've taken the time to have that peep sight set up correctly. And one thing that we do here at the shop, or one thing that I like to do when I'm setting up my peep sight, is obviously the draw length needs to be set correct. We've established that the bow's been set up correctly. When I draw the bow back and anchor, and I come to anchor at full draw, I'll close my eyes and then I'll open my eyes. If that peep sight is not where it needs to be, then I will have whoever's helping me move the peep to my eye. I'll let it down. I'll draw the bow back again, make sure the anchor is consistent. I will open my eye and make sure that the peep is where it is, and then I will have it tied in. And I would encourage you to do that a couple times so that every time you come back to full draw, you're coming back to the same place every time, and that peep is exactly where it needs to be so that there's no question with alignment, right? Because again, like I said, if you're chasing that peep sight up, down, left, or right, you're never going to be consistent. You're never going to be accurate consistently. So it is a major portion of it. And we see it a lot with new shooters because, let's be real, if you're a new shooter, there's a lot of moving parts, and getting anchored correctly and consistently can be a struggle. So one of the things you need to make sure you're doing is gripping that bow correctly so that you're not torquing the bow left or right, and then making sure you're staying within that peep sight. And like I said, it can be difficult to do. I've struggled with it quite a bit. And I'll notice whenever my bow is off, there's usually my two major issues are either my grip or I'm falling out of my peep sight. And I've got to make sure that I'm anchored consistently and that I keep tip of the nose, corner of the mouth on that string. I keep the same amount of facial pressure on that string, and I stay in that peep sight until that shot breaks. Because what I'll do sometimes is I'll start to pull through that shot, and it's almost like I'm trying to look for my arrow prior to it going off, and I come out of my peep sight ever so slightly, and then I will miss left or right. So it's something I've got to continue to work on. And I notice, like I said, if I put my bow down for, even a week or two, I have to kind of really focus on what I'm doing so I don't develop any bad habits and ingrain those bad habits in myself, and then start having all those issues. And they show up very quickly. Like I said, any bad input in the bow is going to have a bad output, and it's amplified at distance. So it's definitely something you need to consider. And again, slow down when you're shooting your bow and you're shooting your arrows. One thing that I like to do is I'll typically have 3 arrows, right? Instead of having a full dozen or, half dozen arrows, I'll shoot 3 arrows. I walk down, grab my arrows, come back, start the process again. And that way I'm not rushing through it, one arrow at a time, take my time with it, put all my attention to what I'm doing, go through my process, shoot that arrow, reset, do that 3 times, walk down, grab my arrows. That's how I like to do it. It seems to slow me down a little bit and keep me in the moment, because when it comes to shooting a bow, you need to stay in the moment. All your attention needs to be going into what you're doing right now. And that, again, helps with your accuracy and your consistency. That's the great thing about archery, right? Taking your time, tune everything out, shoot your bow. It's almost like a form of meditation. You've got to be in the moment with what you're doing. And as soon as you start to break down anywhere, your accuracy starts to fall apart. So it's one of the things. It's easy to get into a rush when it comes to shooting a bow, because it is fun, man. Like, who doesn't love to just go out and sling arrows, sling arrows, sling arrows? But like, that's what we notice too with guys who talk about, I shoot 100 arrows a day, 80 arrows a day, which is great. But it's not good if you're start to fatigue and then everything starts to open up and your form breaks down, right? You've got to build up to those numbers. It's not something you can just go out and shoot 100 arrows a day if you don't shoot a bow consistently. Like, I wouldn't encourage it, because you start to enforce those or develop those bad habits because of fatigue. So take your time, work through it. If you have a goal of shooting so many arrows a day, it's something you definitely need to slowly work up to incrementally in order to make sure that you're doing it with good fundamentals and you're not breaking down and, again, developing those bad habits. From there is creep, right? Anchor creep, where what we see is, depending on the bow, this is the great thing about a bow that has maybe a little bit shorter valley, right? You hold a little bit more weight on the back half. You can't relax as much, because when you start to relax, that bow runs away from you and it keeps you honest. Some of these bows where you are holding less weight on the back half, right? Where the valley is a lot more forgiving, where it's almost hard to let the bow down. You can tend to creep a little bit, right? Where before that shot goes off, the arrow, if you look at the riser, will start to creep forward a little bit before that shot breaks, and that will throw your shot off. So that's why it's important that we shoot using back tension, right? We pull through our shots and our shots break. We don't relax to where that arrow rides forward and then that shot goes off. That's not what we want, because that will cause high or low misses. So you need to make sure at full draw that you stay in the shot. So you stay with a consistent amount of tension on the back wall. And there's some great ways to train this. I like to go to a hinge release, helps me a lot. I've shot tension releases before, but I notice, especially with the tension release, if you've got to pull through that shot, when you set that release up, you got to set it to a certain poundage based off your bow so that it breaks whenever you pull through so much, but it makes you stay honest and stay on that back wall in order for that shot to go off, because if you can't get the bow to go off if it's starting to creep forward. So it just creates a good habit. And again, we see that with people who relax a little bit too much, and we see it a lot with hunting bows, right? Where, it's just a very forgiving valley, and you're able to just relax more than what you should. And then it allows you to creep forward, and that shot goes off. And then you just develop those inconsistencies with when it comes to accuracy. So it's important that you stay in the moment and you stay on that back wall. You don't got to rip through it, but you need consistent pressure on that back wall so that arrow doesn't start to creep forward and cause, high or low miss. And that just kind of moves into like collapsing of the front shoulder, right? Because if this shoulder starts to collapse, that arrow creeps forward, and then you got to punch your trigger and that shot goes off. It's just not consistent. So you almost want to take and think of it like expanding through your shot, I guess is a good way to put it. And almost like you're pulling it apart, right? Because when that shot breaks, it should almost surprise you when it goes off. And that arm, this elbow, should pull all the way through, almost like you're going to elbow somebody in the face. And that's when the shot breaks. You're using good back tension. It's not forced. It's natural. You're pulling through the shot breaks. That elbow you get that follow through. And that's a good way to make sure that you are staying on that back wall and you're not creeping forward. Personally, I like a click in either the hinge release or my thumb button. So I shoot a HBC, the True Ball HBC Flex hinge release. And then I've also, my thumb button, I've been shooting for the last 2 years, the Stand Onyx clicker. I like it. It keeps me honest. I know whenever I get to the click, the shot's about to go off, and I can just follow through and just continue on with my shot. For me, it helps with target panic. I know not everyone, it doesn't work for everybody, but I do like that audible click, knowing where I'm at in my shot process. And the only thing I've got to do from there is finish the shot. So it does work for me. Everyone's different. But it is important that you stay on that back wall and you don't creep forward. And, moving into it, we get into the front shoulder, and these are all easy things, or easy to develop these bad habits, because there's so many different steps within the shot process, and you've really got to be conscious of all of them. And that's why repetition is so important with archery, right? And that's what makes it challenging. You've got to continue to hone these skills and be methodical in the way that you approach them. I think it's important that you think through every step of the shot process. I am by no means an expert. So these are just some of the things that I've struggled with and ways that I've corrected them. Am I a fantastic shooter? Absolutely not. But I do love the process and expanding on what I'm doing and watching and working on things where I struggle. And that's exactly what this is. I just want to share these things with you guys. So take it for what it is. There are experts out there who are actually really, really great at this, who can teach you and help you. Some resources that I've used, again, the School of Knox, Joel Turner. There's a lot of great resources out there and even maybe you have a local coach to you that you can get with that can help dissect your shot process a little bit better. But these are just bringing these to your attention, right? The next one is, like we talked about, that front shoulder. One thing that we see a lot of people do is, whether they're weak, the bow is too heavy for them, like the poundage is too great, or it's just they haven't developed it, is making sure that that front shoulder is not creeping up towards their jaw, right? You're not collapsing, because what happens is that goes into creep. You start to collapse, that arrow rides forward, your shot goes off, you miss. Right? You're not hitting where you need to be. That front shoulder should be down and away from your jaw. And that front lat needs to be flared out, right? The lat muscle it doesn't need to be hunched up. It needs to be down and away. And that works with where you are an anchor pulling through that shot, right? Because as soon as you start to collapse forward, the arrow starts to creep a little bit. You have to force that shot to go off, and it doesn't impact where it should. So you need to make sure with the shot process that you are going through each aspect of it. The front shoulder is another critical part in that. It needs to stay down and away from your jawline, right? Down and out. Keep it away. That way you don't creep up. Because what happens is, if the bow is not set up correctly for you, right? It's too short. You're creeped up like this. That's another good indicator that a bow is set up correctly for you. You shouldn't be overextended by any means. You don't want to be overextended, but you should be naturally able to push that shoulder down and out away from your face. And you should be able to stand up nice and proud in your shooting position, chest open, shoulder down and out, elbow nice and high, and it should feel natural. Same thing with coming into your peep sight. Everything should come in naturally. It should not be forced. You shouldn't be uncomfortable shooting the bow. You shouldn't be dipping, ducking, trying to get your head into the peep sight. You should be able to stand up nice and proud, draw the bow back, come to anchor, and be exactly where you need to be, right? It should feel natural. It should not be forced. And if there is an issue or an area where it just doesn't feel like it lines up correctly, that's when it's worth looking at the bow and making sure it is set up correctly for you, right? But assuming it is, you need to make sure that you are putting in all the right inputs into that bow in order to be consistent and accurate with your actual bow. Some great ways to really dissect what you're doing. One thing I do, obviously, I do a ton of videos, right? With Extreme Outfitters and the Archery Project and my personal page. I shoot a bow a lot, spend a lot of time behind a camera, but I like to go through and dissect my shooting. And I can assure you it's usually not perfect. But it is great. It's a great learning point. I like to look at different aspects of it and see where my mistakes are, and then try to correct them. And again, that's the great thing about archery is it's a constantly evolving thing, right? We're not perfect. We're not chasing perfection. We're chasing progression. We're constantly looking to improve on what we're doing, and using your camera or your phone to record you is a great way to kind of monitor where you are in the process and where you're strong and where you're weak and how you need to correct those things. If you're brave enough, you can put it out on social media and let people pick you apart. I get it quite a bit. But again, even if it's just for your personal, just to reflect on where you're at and what you're doing and where you can improve, because we can all improve. I mean, that's a fact. I mean, maybe not Bodie Turner, but pretty much everybody else out there, all us average bow hunter guys that are, spend the majority of our time focused on being better, woodsmanship skills and shooting our bow for that. We've always got areas that we can tighten up on, and improve on. So just be mindful. It's like I said, especially if you're a new shooter, man, it takes time to develop this, and it's all about repetition, but your reps you put in need to be good quality reps, because it is so easy with a bow to develop bad habits and then build on those bad habits. And then they are so difficult to break. Right. And we see it a lot, especially with guys who've been shooting a bow for a long time. Who've never had any coaching, just kind of did it on their own, and they come in, this is how I've been shooting forever. And it's like, okay, yeah, it kind of works, but we can see where, it can always be improved upon and be better. I mean, and that's our goal as an archer, right? To be a better shooter, more consistent and more accurate. That's the great thing about shooting these great distances, right? Like, I'd never shoot anything past 35 yards. Yeah, maybe not hunting, but it's if you're a whitetail hunter, but the challenge is there, and it just makes you a better shooter. And I think that's what it's all about: progressing, becoming better, and enjoying the process. So take it for what it is, guys. This is just for me, just a dude that enjoys shooting a bow, who's struggled his way through, and continues to try to hone his skills and kind of improve along the way. I love it, man. I love shooting the bow, and I love progressing. I love chasing tighter groups. I love trying to pass on the things that I've learned, because I know someone else out there has struggled with the same things I have. The final piece I'll leave you with is the mental execution part. And I think this is great for, if you really struggle with the mental side, the target panic side of thing. I think Joel Turner is a great resource. I know I've dropped him a couple times, but he is a professional when it comes to this, and he can really help you get through that. And the real killers are the anticipation of the shot, forcing the shot to go off, aiming instead of executing a good shot, right? It's very, very easy to develop target panic, and target panic can be crippling for people. Luckily, I've not struggled to the extent some people have, but I've had friends who have struggled with target panic to where they've put the bow down and they've had to put it down for a while and almost completely got out of archery because they just panic so much. So I think the mental side of things is something you've definitely got to work on, and you've got to become aware of where you are in your process, and you've developing that shot process, I think, helps to minimize the target panic side of things and improve on your mental execution when it comes to a shot process. Because when you have something laid out, an actual process that you can walk through, I think it improves on the entire aspect of what you're doing, right? You can go through and say, okay, grip, anchor, aim, expand, follow through, right? You've got that entire process that you work through in order to execute on a shot, and it keeps you in the moment, right? So you're not focused on everything going around. So that little bit of pin float that you're getting, which you should have, that pin is never going to be still. It doesn't affect you to the point to where you're trying to hammer that shot to get it off to go right away. You can go through, you trust in the pin float, you stay back on the back wall, you're pulling through your shot. You know it's okay. That pin's floating just as it should. You're aiming, expanding through that shot, and then you follow through, and that shot goes off. When it breaks, it just seems to always find it's the correct point of impact that you're aiming at. So yeah, it's important, man. Spend a lot of time behind the bow is basically what I'm trying to tell you. Shoot the bow often, develop good habits. and work through and dissect each aspect of what you're doing. And you ultimately will end up becoming a better archer. And it does take time. It takes repetition. It requires you to be in the moment with each aspect of it. And using your camera, I think, is a great resource in order to break down what you're doing so you can see where you actually are weak, because you may not feel like it, but then when you actually watch yourself, you're like, oh, I'm collapsing my front shoulder, or, oh, yeah, my grip is off, or, oh, look, I'm falling out of the peep sight, whatever it may be. It's a great way to dissect that and then dive into what the actual problem is and then correct it. Like I said, I'm not the end all be all with this. I'm just a guy that enjoys shooting a bow, that has struggled in all of these different areas and have continued to work through it and improve on it. And like I said, a lot of great resources. Check them out. If you are really struggling in an area, find a local coach who can help you out. There's some really, really great guys. I'll give you a prime example. There's a shop up in Raleigh. His name's John Winker. He owns it. And he is a phenomenal coach, someone that I should probably go work with. But I would say if you're really serious about it, get somebody that can help you out, or, throw those videos up and ask for, positive, feedback from people, or constructive criticism, how you can improve on what you're doing. So think about it, guys, as you're going through your shot process. Slow down what you're doing, enjoy the process, but work through it methodically so that you can become a more proficient archer, bow hunter, whatever it is. Yeah. And if you're a guy that's chasing a lot of arrows, right, make sure you're not fatiguing and breaking down and develop those bad habits. It's easy to do. As much as I love shooting a bow, sometimes I got to put it down and walk away and, take a little bit of break to recover. So that is it, my friends. So I'd be interested with you guys, drop some comments and let me know where you've kind of struggled in ways that you've, corrected those issues or fixed those issues. And then whatever resources you guys think other guys who are struggling with some of these issues, where they could seek out and find answers and maybe potentially reach out or follow a series that's on YouTube. That's what we're here for, provide resources to help guys out, improve on what they're doing in the archery world. So that's it, guys. As always, I appreciate you guys following along. As always, if you got questions, drop them. I'll do my best to respond to them. And yeah, keep getting after it. Keep shooting your bows. You guys know if you need anything archery related, you can always check us out. I've got questions. You can always reach out to my techs at Extreme Outfitters. We will be more than happy to help you out. But again, appreciate you guys. We'll see you guys in the next episode of The Archery Project.